Okay, so before we get started on the article reviews for today, today's the 3rd March. In order to be fair and balanced, I'll start the roll sheet on this side of the room. I would like to tell you all a story about when I went to, before we do your article reviews, when I left the ivory tower here at UCO as an administrator and professor of legal studies to go to industry. I got this job with a publicly traded company that was an educational software publisher, and I started my first day at the company during our national sales meeting, which was held in downtown Oklahoma City. And the president of the company started the sales meeting. I mean, he was a really warm and friendly guy who started by saying, "We're not bankrupt, but we're broke. 12 of you are miserable failures. I don't have to call you out by name. You know who you are," to our sales force. And so I tell you this story because sometimes people don't listen to what I say. And so you have until midnight tonight. You need to make a clear connection to theory in your essays if you want to retract or if you want to resubmit something to the Dropbox on your exams. Obviously, I need the Scantrons, but you have at least until midnight tonight because sometimes people don't make clear. I mean, there's a rubric, first of all, for the article review in the syllabus, and that same kind of analysis using the IRAC formula is what I'm going to be using to look at to grade, that same kind of introduction, substantive analysis of the fact pattern and reaching a conclusion in terms of grading. So you might just want to look at that so that you get the grade that you hopefully want. Also, I mentioned this because I say over and over and over again, and I guess people don't always believe me, I get a voluminous amount of emails from my administrative position here, and if I don't respond to your email, please send me a text and say, "Hey, I sent it," so that I can answer your question, because I literally get 100 emails a day of terms of things like Title IX reporting and stuff that just is, I have to delete it out, but it takes a while, and so it's also possible that perhaps your email falls into that crack and I don't get to it. So two things that I wanted to mention, and I won't call anybody out by name, like Jeff was so kind. I thought, wow, that's a really good way to motivate a sales force, by the way. 12 of you are miserable failures. And I'm not saying that to anybody in here, but just, so that you're not shocked or surprised by grades. If you want to take a look at yours and resubmit it, you might think about that. So,
are you talking about the essay for the test or the article?
Yes. If you want to resubmit your article review because you think you missed the mark, I'll let you do that too.
Okay.
Isn't that sweet of me? Swell.
So we need to describe some kind of ethical theory that we want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be, if you look at the rubric, there needs to be a connection to theory.
Okay.
There needs to be some connection, some nexus to the theory in your arguments there. So if you have questions, call me, email me. I'll be glad to help you in any way I can to give you advice if you want, so let me know. We need to talk about some of your articles, so we'll start with that. And since nobody seems to want to jump up, I'll just go ahead and start on that side of the room. We got volunteers only begrudgingly last time. So
okay.
You get to go first.
I get to go first. So I talked about the marketing of the fur trade in the fashion industry, specifically dealing with what has been newly coined as the fast fashion industry, where there's basically 365 fashion seasons, so there's one for every day of the year, and there were 320 out of the 460-something fashion shows in 2015 featured fur in some fashion or another, either full lines of pelt or adornments of pelt, and even people who were initially opposed to fur, their names escape me, they now feature full lines of synthetic furs, so they visually endorse the fur. And so there's also arguments about greenwashing. The idea of fur that natural fur from an animal pelt is actually more environmentally friendly than a synthetic fur that uses petroleum. But what I used to do the analysis was egoism and relativism, because basically the article that I looked at didn't really take a side. It said, this is what's happening, these are the issues, you decide for yourself. So because now it's just an accessory piece, it's become removed from the animal itself. Because minks are really cute. Have you ever looked at a picture of a mink? They're adorable. You know, can you imagine wearing a little baby mink? So, but
You think they're really cute animals?
the white ones are.
They're horrible creatures. In fact, they're mean and nasty. They bite and snap.
Because
and,
they're being made into
and there's a very famous case in law about a mink rancher whose mother mink, they'll eat their own young if they become distressed. Ate all of her own mink because they had moved some kind of industrial complex next door, and the noise was creating a problem and sending the minks into psychoses, and they were eating their own young. So they sued on a tort theory of basically your noise pollution is coming onto my property and damaging me, which is sort of a novel position. But I'm not sure they're all that cute and furry, you know.
The white ones are. I don't know.
The white ones,
The white
okay.
ones are. But I think in the family, I think we have 6 or 7 full length. We have a Canadian long hair lynx that we had made. Had made in the 80s. Over the top. But so I guess my family, the family and I support the fur industry, and Fendi makes some really cute little fur purses with little eyes on them.
Okay.
Adorable. So it is adorable.
Uh-huh.
And you have to support that.
So you're all about wearing the mink.
Well,
okay.
I guess so.
All right.
I like the fox.
You like the fox. Okay.
We have a fur from New Mexico. We have a sheared beaver from New Mexico.
Okay, so you're looking at this from an ethical egoist, and what was the other one? Perspective?
Yeah.
Subjectivist? Okay. Well, subjectivism would say what?
That
Do whatever you
do
want.
whatever you want. Kill the baby.
Right. It's up to you to decide whether or not animal cruelty plays a role in this. The egoist would say what?
Also, put your own self choices first.
Right. If you want that mink and you have the ability to go get it, why not? That's in your own self. They are very warm.
Yes, they are.
And have any of you ever worn a full fur coat, a real fur coat? They're enormously warm. I see you in the back making funny faces over the mink coat story. How many of you have a leather jacket? How many of you have owned a leather jacket at some point in time? What's the difference between leather jacket and mink coat?
Snuffer.
They both hide though.
They're both-
It's a
And
pelt.
they're both-
It's
yeah,
a pelt.
Mine's not real.
Your leather jacket's not real? Okay. All right. What other kind of? It's amazing if you look at vegans. And what is a vegan? This is extreme.
They don't eat anything from an animal, right?
No, they won't not just eat anything, they won't own anything. One of my friends claimed that she was a vegan, and she raised arrows. She was on my doctoral committee, and I said, I noticed, Grace Ann, that you have a leather saddle. True vegans, and she said, well, I got those before before I saw the light and became a vegan. But I had another friend who she went through this whole thing, and they look at everything that you can, and it's amazing how many products that are processed contain byproducts of animals. And so they won't eat anything like honey because it turns the honeybees into, in her words, not mine, honey whores. It turns the silkworms, and so they won't wear silk. They won't wear any leather products, won't eat any products that have byproducts of animal rendering. So that also includes not just honey and silk, but also what? Eggs, cheese. It's just sort of incredible. And I asked Angela what she did if her husband became a vegan with her, and she said no. And so it almost became, if you know anything, since I'm Jewish, I know what it takes to keep a kosher kitchen. Not that we ever have, but I know what the rules are to do this, and it's a lot of work because you have to have 2 refrigerators and 2 sets of dishes and sinks and things like that. And so Angela actually did this. She had her husband's refrigerator and his stove because she didn't want to have any animal fat in the pans or anything like that she was using. And so it's a very sort of stringent lifestyle to achieve because you would not imagine how many things actually contain. Think about your shoes. How many of you have leather shoes? You're going to have dress shoes. And it's interesting that the people who are oftentimes against the fur trade, they'll wear leather shoes. And I guess it's a little bit of a subjectivist attitude of, well, we only want to save the cute animals, right? What are you? I'm an otter. What do you do? I swim on back and I do cute little human things with my hands. You're free to go. What are you? I'm a cow. Get on the bus. You're a hamburger. You're a baseball glove. I mean, so where do you draw the line? And what do you think? Where do you think you should draw the line? I mean, these are leather shoes, obviously, you know.
I think the position that I make is that as long as it's done ethically and done with certain mores, that as long as it turns a profit, then it's 73% of the entire fashion industry is behind you. So why not have had some full fur?
There are animals. I mean, so you got fur, and I think that there are people that have brought. There are animals that would not exist today but for human intervention and us keeping them alive. Horses, the horse industry, for example, they're pretty fragile creatures, and a lot of the breeds have lots of problems. Particularly, we bred the feet off of them, and so they wouldn't really do real well in wild situations. And we have compensated for that by, with those characteristics that then become genetically problematic, we fix it with shoeing the horse so that they can still go over rocky terrain and stuff like that. But it's a different animal than, what roamed the earth. And I think I told you there was a book that was a book full of answers to what they considered to be dumb questions, and they said the closest one that they came to a dumb question was the worst was winded wild poodles roamed the earth. And so obviously wild poodles didn't roam the earth at one point in time. They've been hybridized, genetically modified in the strictest sense of the word for certain characteristics. And when you do that, there are compromises. But there are animals and creatures that would not even exist today if it weren't for the fact that we sort of keep them alive. Horses would probably be one that would be extinct, but for the fact that people still find them useful and enjoyable. Cattle, would we have as many cattle, just free roaming the earth if we didn't use them for food? And there's an argument that isn't some life better than, having an animal that is born and is useful and is raised to provide sustenance isn't that better than just not having them? Some life is better than no life. Now, if you've ever watched Food Inc., which I did, I almost became a vegetarian until I got really hungry and had to go get a cheeseburger. 3 days later, it lasted for 3 wonderful, glorious days after watching that movie about what happens. And the slaughtering of animals en masse is really sort of horrific. There is a woman who, her specialty, she was diagnosed with Asperger's, which they've now taken out of the DSM-5 as a diagnosis, and they just now say you have an autism disorder and you're somewhere on the autism spectrum, and her name's Temple Grandin. She got a PhD, and her PhD is basically in humane slaughter of animals. She's at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and her focus was on, she could connect with animals, and that's generally a feature of people who are further along the autism spectrum than some of the more mild forms of autism, that they can identify with animals and inanimate objects, but not necessarily with people in the best way. And so her whole process has been on focusing on how we go about, in the most humane way possible, raising these animals. Now, I think a lot of people would say we've gotten to a point in corporate farming where it's not humane. You've got pigs in western Oklahoma. There are more pigs and pig farms in western Oklahoma than there are people now. And they're crated. They're raised completely in an artificial environment in a concrete crate that keeps the mother sow from rolling over on the piglets. And the time to finish has been reduced. They've been bred basically and genetically modified through selective breeding processes to put on weight as quickly as possible and reduce the number of days from birth to slaughter that it takes to raise many things. Chickens are another one. Every year they pardon 2 chickens on the White House lawn. And Sarah Palin, when she was governor of Alaska, did this as well, and it was sort of a horrific image because as she's pardoning the turkeys in Alaska, at Thanksgiving, they were slaughtering them in the background behind her. And they shove them in this machine that basically just kind of rips them apart. And it was a horrific scene. But they pardon 2 turkeys, the president does this every year, and they go to a farm. And I think the farm was in Connecticut, and they went up there and did an interview, and they're like thinking that there's got to be, lots of turkeys running around, and there weren't. And the reason is that they've been selectively bred to basically fatten up as quickly as you possibly can, and then die if they of natural causes, mostly heart attacks, very quickly if they're not slaughtered. And so they said, well, how long do the turkeys usually live after they get here to this farm, that after the president has pardoned these 2 turkeys? And I think they said most of them don't even make it past 1.5 years before they just sort of fall over and die, because they're just bred to put on massive amounts of meat very, very quickly, and that affects other vital organs. And so there's that aspect of the animal industry. And then I think there's another impact. And so one of the things that we talk about in terms of sustainability is something called the triple bottom line. And there are marketers who say that we need to reorganize marketing not so much around the 4 Ps, but the 7 Ps. So what are the 4 Ps of marketing? Product, price, place, promotion. And to that, sustainable marketers would argue that we need to focus on people, planets, and profits in terms of sustainability. What is good for people? What is good for our planet? We live on a planet that can comfortably sustain perhaps 3 billion people. We have 7, and we are doing colossal damage to that. One of the greatest sources of pollution, of water and air quality, are the large-scale farming of cattle and hogs, because they produce voluminous amounts of what? Waste, and that turns in what else? As part of the waste? Methane. Gas. We're suing the state of Arkansas, or have sued the state of Arkansas when Drew Edmondson was Attorney General, over the waste products that Tyson and the state of Arkansas were allowing to basically enter our watershed in Oklahoma from all of the chicken farms that were on the other side of the Oklahoma-Arkansas state line. And again, this is another area, and so people focus on things like free-range chickens, cage-free eggs, and it's amazing. They don't let you into those facilities, but there have been people that have snuck cameras in. Tyson is very, very careful to not let you in, and they're farmers. They won't let you do interviews because they don't want you to see. They basically live in these hothouses, and they just grow so quickly and put on so much weight that they can't even really move around, even if they open the door, and that's what they mean by free range in a lot of these instances, is they don't just keep them in there, they will open the door, but because they've never been raised in an environment other than that, they don't leave, and their feathers are largely burned off from the ammonia that they produce in terms of the waste that they're sitting in. And so their chests and things are just absolutely raw. And it's not just what it's doing to the bird. If that waste is entering in the watershed, what do you think it's doing to us? So if you think about this from a theoretical standpoint of a utilitarian analysis, we're doing colossal damage in terms of the byproducts, the externalities that are produced from these industries. And how do you measure whether or not the overall societal benefit is a net positive gain? What's the positive aspect of? Yeah, it's a lot cheaper. How much is chicken? When I was the Associate General Counsel here, I had a guy who worked for me in the office who did our risk management, and he was from Ghana. And he had come to this country as a young man to get an education, and he was part of sort of the education elite of Ghana because his family was wealthy enough to be able to send him. But even so, even though he came from a sort of wealthy family in Ghana, he said it was shocking to him to come to the United States and see people eating chicken every day. Because he said if you saw people eating chicken in Ghana, that was a special occasion. And we generally think of chicken as being the what? It's the cheap meat. It's my father owns a cattle ranch, and I used to, in the summers, I'd go to friends' houses and stuff like that, and I'd say they actually had chicken. Chicken is peasants' food. Beef, it's what's for dinner. So, but we produce this stuff cheaply. And so you all get your chicken McNuggets, fast and easy, from Chick-fil-A or McDonald's or whatever over there. But are we doing more damage to the planet and future generations? Now, from a Kantanian perspective, you might argue that we have a duty not to. The interesting thing about Kant is that he says that you don't have a duty to non-rational beings. And people who are not yet born are not necessarily are non-rational beings. So, do we actually have a duty to future generations? Or should we worry about just the current generation? These are really tough issues to deal with. How much damage are we going to do to the environment in the next 10 years? There's a television show that's gone off the air now called Newsroom. Anybody see this series? And in one episode, they interview the deputy director of the Environmental Protection Agency, and he basically says it's hopeless at this point. We've done such colossal damage to the environment that it's probably non-recoverable at this point in time. I don't know. What do you all think about fur? How many of you think it's okay to wear fur? How many of you find it ethically questionable? Do you think the answer changes if you weren't in Oklahoma? It's amazing to me, though, how many people, there are now vegetarian restaurants that have popped up in Oklahoma. I never thought that would go over very big here, but we're actually changing somewhat slowly, I guess. Okay, very good. Good topic. Interesting topic.
Price discrimination in airline tickets.
Okay. Go ahead. Tell us about price discrimination.
Well, I read an article that was 12 pages, and this team from Belgium put together an experiment trying to figure out, because the theory is that airlines track your data and your cookies to jack up prices the more you visit the website, the more you search for the same locations and things. So in their experiment, they built a program. It was like a scraper kind of program. And so they created 66 user profiles, and they had different criteria data behind each profile. So if the websites were tracking them, they could kind of see if it would pigeonhole the users into certain price categories. And so they did this experiment for, I think it was 2 weeks, and they actually found that that wasn't the case at all. That they don't use your information to track and raise prices the more you frequent their websites or the more you search for tickets. So I was doing it originally on utilitarianism, but the more I think about it, it might need to change, just because it doesn't follow the original theory that airlines are out to get you or out to price gouge you specifically.
How do they do pricing if it's not discrimination on utilization? And actually, I think to some extent, even with one of the ones that was the least discriminatory, they've actually started to discriminate somewhat, and that's Southwest Airlines. Southwest was forever and ever just a cattle call. How are they now discriminating for business class passengers?
Are they one of the ones that start to do by weight?
No,
No?
no, they haven't.
Bags fly free.
Your bags fly free, but how do they discriminate? Again, I mean, basically, it is in the strictest sense of the word, and people all the time say, well, we shouldn't discriminate. We discriminate all the time. And you can discriminate for all kinds of reasons, just not the wrong reason. And we discriminate economically in this country for a lot of reasons, and that's certainly not the wrong reason. Generally speaking, when we talk about suspect classes, the poor are not a suspect class, and we discriminate against them in all kinds of ways. In terms of where they can go and eat. I mean, restaurants are, in the strictest sense of the word, engaging in discrimination by having an exclusive menu and high prices, aren't they? I mean, you're discriminating against poor people. How many poor people can go eat at Vast? Have any of you eaten at Vast?
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Do you like it?
I like the scallops.
Okay.
It's really not like.
That was overpriced.
Thought it was overpriced?
Oh, worth the price.
Okay, so Southwest used to be, I think, the least discriminatory in their pricing scheme, because it was just kind of like, these are the prices based on time. That's how they initially did it. And you got your boarding group based on what?
When you logged into.
Well, in the good old days, when I first started flying, it wasn't even when you logged in. They actually had these paper ticket things that you got that nobody actually uses anymore. And they had, Southwest had plastic boarding cards. And they boarded by, group numbers to make sure that there wasn't just a complete and utter rush at the gate. But the way they passed out those boarding cards, they were plastic so they could reuse them, because Southwest was the low-cost alternative to the other airlines. That was their sort of pricing model. And they would reuse the boarding cards, but they gave you colors on the boarding cards, these plastic things. And it was basically, the first time I flew Southwest, and for about the first 5 years, you got your color based on what? It was absolutely egalitarian. No. First one to the counter. You got to the counter and checked in early, you got the blue boarding card, or whatever it was, the A group or B group or C group. And now, what have they done in order to?
Check in online.
Yeah, well, but you're only randomized with regard to the check-in online if you fly what? Southwest now has 3 classes of tickets. So it was very egalitarian because it was open seating once you got on board, and they gave you the boarding cards based on when you got to the airport and checked in. Now, it's only with regard to there are 3 categories of tickets. There's Business Select, there's Fly Anytime, and there's I Just Want to Get Away. And if you choose the I Just Want to Get Away, if the plane is full, you're going to be in which group? You're going to be in the last group. You're going to be in that, they have A, 1 through 15 are the Business Select members that are flying, that get to board first. And you buy that ticket because what? Southwest doesn't have first class the way American does, but you do get what? If you have that A 1 through 15.
The front rows.
You get the bulkhead, which has more leg room, or the what? The exit rows. And isn't that a better position to be in than the rest of the plane in Southwest? And so they've even started to discriminate on the basis of price in their model based on sort of 3 levels of what you want. Now, again, if you're in the A 1 through 15, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will always get that thing, because if it's a connecting flight that has other people that didn't get off, they may jump in and take those bulkhead seats before you get them, but it guarantees you a better opportunity to have it, doesn't it? And generally speaking, it's almost a sure bet that if you're in that 1 through 15, you're going to probably get a better shot at those aisle or window or exit row seats and the bulkhead. So what do the other airlines use to determine pricing? And Southwest actually does this as well. They combine another feature in the pricing model. So what else do they use?
They actually didn't pinpoint any certain airline vendors or anything. They tested through, I think it was about 20 or 30 of them, but there weren't any specifically in their study that they pointed out individually.
Okay, so how are they pricing them, though? I mean, over all of the airlines, how do they generally price tickets?
That's a great question, and I look forward to reiterating that on my paper before midnight tonight.
They use complex models to come up with fee schedules based on the demand for the routes, and it uses a complex econometrics model to determine what are the most profitable and what how they can maximize revenue based on historic trends over the route, and those models change almost on a daily basis. That's why pricing will change. The closer you get to the date, what happens? It goes up. If you book more than 2 weeks out, you get a better price. You can also get a better price just by looking at it and some of the things that they've done and looking at an analysis of pricing that airlines use. Is if you're willing to fly on certain days, you have better rates. What are the days that you get better rates? When do you not want to fly? When are the most expensive days? Sunday and Monday are expensive days to fly because that's what?
People are leaving and coming home from trip.
That's the business traveler, and they know, based on these sort of econometric model analysis, that business travelers and companies will do what? With regard to elasticity of demand, are they more or less elastic than maybe pleasure travelers? If you have to get to a meeting, you'll do what?
Pay whatever you have to pay.
You'll pay what you have to pay to get there. And you're less sensitive to the pricing than someone who's just flying for pleasure, for a vacation. So it's one of the reasons that Southwest also has on their thing, you can select they'll say, are you flexible in your dates? And then they'll give you a pricing model based on flexibility, and they'll tell you what are the cheapest fares. Is there anything inherently wrong with that kind of discrimination? Again, we discriminate in all kinds of areas, don't we? Based on economic factors. Can anybody live in Gaillardia? Isn't that economic discrimination? Can anybody live in Oak Tree? Does anybody want to live in Oak Tree anymore? That was the big country club to live on when I was growing up in Oklahoma. That was the posh place. And then it was Gaillardia. What happened to Gaillardia? It went bankrupt. So, but we discriminate all the time on that basis of economic ability to pay. All right, very good.
I wrote my paper on alcohol, which is powdered alcohol, and how it's wrong. It markets more towards the younger crowd, and it'll be easier for teenagers to get. So, how that was wrong.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how do they make powdered alcohol?
sure, they won't, like, the company won't release how they make it,
Have you ever tried it?
no. It's illegal in 25 states,
I thought it was
so it's
illegal
not very easy to get.
in the United States.
In what?
I thought it was illegal, like, in the United States, I didn't know it was legal.
I don't,
here.
I don't think that the FDA has actually banned it on a national level. So I think you're just.
Their
and there's-
labels got okayed by like I think it was FDA.
In the movie The Joneses, I think I mentioned this before, that was one of the products that they actually featured in that movie. Did we talk about that movie in here? With Demi Moore? Have any of you seen it? So Demi Moore and David Duchovny play and star in this movie, and it's called The Joneses, and the S is a dollar sign. And they're a fake family that marketers put together to basically infiltrate. It is guerrilla marketing. They send them in, they buy them a house or rent them a house and set them up, and then they have them basically go in and go to the country club, join, use the newest sets of golf drivers and golf clubs, have the newest model of whatever the sports car is. The kids who are really adults enroll in high school and wear all of the fashionable clothing, and they provide them with liquor for parties. And it turns out, at the end, it drives one of the neighbors to actually committing suicide because he can't keep up with the Joneses. And so it's sort of a dark utopian or dark take on what we could consider guerrilla marketing. Why would you use powdered alcohol?
Well, the creator of it said he wanted to be able to take it with him easily when he went camping and stuff, but then a lot of people think teenagers are gonna or anyone in general, just gonna pour a lot of it into a glass to get drunker faster.
Does it have flavors?
Yeah, it had flavors.
Okay. Why do you have flavors? Anybody just love the taste of alcohol? Yes?
Whiskey with some.
Whiskey? I think it's, and the ones that I think that they initially were coming up with for the powdered flavors were things that appeal to who?
The younger crowd.
They appeal to kids, because the first time, how many of you remember the first drink you took? I remember, I was something like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, and we're having a Seder dinner, and in Judaism, wine is part of that dinner, and so I had some, and the instant reaction was yuck. Of course, kosher wine is always yuck if you've ever had it. Have you ever had Mogen David, Manischewitz, kosher wine? It's god awful. It tastes like NyQuil cough syrup. So it's not exactly something that you just are out there dying to drink as a young person. Why do you acquire a taste for it? Well, it's the inhibitory effects that it provides. So they're making these, and they make them in these flavors, and they're doing the same thing with vodka, because vodka can be infused in anything. What are the flavors of vodka?
Fruity.
Bubblegum, cupcake, cookies and cream. And is that really appealing? Who's that appealing to? Who are they? Yeah, it's appealing to young people. The cigarette industry is doing the same thing, aren't they? With
That commercial.
Have you seen those commercials with the kids playing with the flavored cigars?
no.
Can we
It's
take
like
this home?
It's like a tobacco stops with me commercial, and it's just these little kids, and this table's just covered with all like the flavored cigars and stuff, and saying that tobacco companies are trying to attract kids to get to smoke, and these are like 6-year-old kids, and they're trying to get them to smoke because of their great flavored. And my dad works for a tobacco company, and he just thinks it's the funniest thing ever, because they're not making these products to get 6-year-olds to start smoking. They're making these products so that 18-year-olds will start smoking. I mean, either way, it's bad, but they're not focusing the products on infants.
You're gonna justify this.
I'm not trying to justify.
Hold on, I'm gonna have to There we go. So, is there a big difference in terms of the impulse control between a 6-year-old and an 18-year-old?
No, but when they show a commercial with children, like little children, playing with tobacco products, you have to be 18 to buy it anyway. So it's not like they're focusing their products on people that can't buy their products. That would be.
Do you honestly think they're not focusing their products? I mean, do you honestly think that they don't want, as young as they can get to smoke?
6-year-olds?
They don't care.
Does Philip Morris care who buys their product?
No, but I mean, they have enough. I don't know. I think it's funny that they have 6, 7, 8-year-old kids in this commercial saying that they need to stop producing tobacco products that are flavored because it's attracting them to want to.
Smoke it.
When you put the graphics on the package that indicate that it's vanilla bean flavor or black cherry or any of the others, don't you think that inherently makes it attractive to young people? And again, so their target market is 18-year-olds. And in the movie Thank You for Smoking, they actually talk about this. You know, why would we want to kill our clients? We want to keep our clients. You know, if you die early, well, you know, you're not buying our products.
Yeah. I just say an 8-year-old walks into a convenience store and sees a grape flavored cigar. He's not going to be able to, one, buy it himself, or hope to God that he doesn't ask his mom and his mom buys it for him. So it's like.
But if it's in your mom's car and you see something with a bubble gum sign on it, I feel like, I mean, I have kids. If they saw something with a bubble gum thing on it, they'd be like, oh, like, what is that? I mean, I don't smoke, so I don't know, but.
I would be willing to bet that you all don't even remember this, but when I was growing up, and you can still find them in some specialty candy stores in places, but what did they use to?
Candy cigarette.
They used to manufacture candy cigarettes that had boxes and logos and stuff like that that were remarkably close to actual brands of cigarettes. And the really cool ones were not just the ones that were a sugar stick, but the ones that actually were wrapped in a cigarette paper that had powdered, a little bit of powdered sugar in them, and they were gum. And you could blow them and it looked like it was, you know, at least for one puff, it looked like you were blowing smoke. Oh, how times have changed. That we don't market them. But I think that a lot of these products are being marketed to people who are enormously young. And I think that the powdered alcohol is probably one of them. And studies show, how many of you are under 25 in here? Almost everyone. Your impulse control until you reach the age of 25 is still greatly reduced compared to people who are over the age of 25 because portions of your brain are still developing at that point. And so, is there a big difference? I mean, we make bright lines in the law and we say 18, but is an 18-year-old really that much more sophisticated than a 16-year-old? Why is it that your insurance rates are higher at your age, for all of you, how many of you are under 25? A big portion of you are under 25, than they are for me. You're more likely to engage in what? Risky behavior. Why? Again, because all of the cognitive functions, and particularly those that regulate caution, are less prevalent in people under the age of 25. And so, is the marketing of these types of products really an example of the will being overborne by marketers. And there are marketing ethicists who would say that, yeah, what we're doing is we're creating irrational wants and demands for people that really lack the impulse control, and maybe the will is not fully, not fully engaged in being able to resist these. This turned into an interesting case because the term that philosophers came up with for this irrational desire that they say that perhaps marketers are creating is called affluenza. It's a word that they made up in philosophy of marketing departments and philosophy departments in colleges and universities. And it was picked up by a psychiatrist or psychologist in a case in Texas now involving the so-called affluenza teen defense, where his lawyers argued and had a psychiatrist testify that because the young man who was involved in the killing of like 4 or 5 other individuals as he was driving down the road, completely dead drunk, was a byproduct of his family's lifestyle, which was a healthy dose of, giving him anything he wanted to make sure that he didn't bother them a whole lot and was entertained, and neglect. And it results in him, killing these people. And then the outrage got even more when it turns out that he was on probation. So what was his sentence for killing all these people? Anybody remember what the sentence was?
House arrest for some time.
It wasn't even house arrest. It was probation for, I think, 10 years. I may have that wrong. And while you're on probation, what are the restrictions that you're supposed to abide by? No drinking while you're on probation. And after he's killed these people, something that you would think might really create some guilt in someone, he flees to Mexico. And why does he flee to Mexico? Well, because there's a YouTube video of him that pops up that shows him playing, of all things, beer pong. Now, I don't know. I mean, again, this goes back to a question of, do we have free will? And perhaps is it a continuum where you have more judgment as you get older? Is it maybe not an example of you have free will here or you don't here, but there's somewhere along a spectrum? What about one of the things that your text authors argue, or not authors, the author of the text argues, is that autonomy is not something that you have one moment and not the next. And I'm not sure that that's not true. I mean, I'm not sure that that is true. I'm not sure that it's not a false statement. Because I think autonomy is something that maybe you can have depending on and based in what we might call a totality of the circumstances. So lawyers love this idea of the totality of the circumstances test, which is a factors test. And what we look at in this test is we weigh all of the factors to determine the relevance of certain criterion in legal tests for things like tort law. We even see totalities of circumstance tests being used in UCC cases where we're going to have to look at whether or not there was enough factors present for the formation of a contract under the UCC, since it does away with what's called the mirror image rule. And so when we look at these things and we say that you have autonomy all of the time, which is what Dr. Desjardins argues in the textbook, is it dependent upon these totality of the circumstances? Can somebody, for example, who is a business person, make a rational choice? Let's suppose that you're running your business and you have to make rational choices about, for example, the purchasing of restaurant supplies. Let's say you're the manager or the restaurant owner of Vast. Could you make rational decisions in that area of your life, but if you, for some reason, suddenly found out that you were stricken with leukemia, maybe you're not making the most rational decisions with regard to those medical options? In other words, can you have rationality and autonomy in this area of your life and maybe not in another that's compartmentalized and separate and distinct from the other circumstances that you're facing? The author seems to say that you can't, that you're either an autonomous individual or you're not. But if you were diagnosed with cancer, where should you probably be going? Anybody want to guess? If you live in this area. Well, there's a...
Tulsa cancers?
Oh, really? So you think CTCA is... I think CTCA is a fraud.
Okay.
I mean, they have wonderful advertising, and they make you feel good, and they, you know, Peggy is a 10-year survivor of pancreatic cancer. Peggy's going to die, okay? Now, it's only an issue of when. Now, I think that if I were diagnosed with cancer, I could probably continue to run my business and make rational decisions. I'm not going to go out, you know, given the fact that I want to leave stuff maybe to my heirs and assigns, and you know, buy stuff that I don't need for my business. But I might see the CTCA thing, and when your doctor says you're going to die, and this, you know, this is a powerful ad that they have with Peggy. She says, you know, I went to one doctor and he said, Peggy, you're going to die. Well, you are, Peggy. You know, I'm sorry. You're probably, you know, I have an uncle who is an oncologist at the University of Texas at Austin in their medical school. Has 3 professorships, and he said his area of specialty was pancreatic cancer. There's 2 types. There's a type that can go into remission, but eventually you're going to, but you know, I mean, the truth of the matter is, I guess if you take that to logical extremes, no one is getting out of this alive, right? We're all going to die at some point in time. I don't know that the choice of CTCA, if I am emotionally involved, I think I could probably make rational decisions about my business. I'm not going to all of a sudden start buying, you know, copious quantities of filet mignon when filet mignon isn't on the menu at the business I own. But I might not be selecting the best choice. And if you got cancer, probably the best place to go in this area is not CTCA in Tulsa. It's MD Anderson in Houston. That's where you ought to be going. But you might not be making that rational choice, and your autonomy might be violated by the fact that CTCA has these really pretty ads with a real big disclaimer at the end that says what?
Not all cancers, though.
Right, and results are not typical of, you know, I mean, of what may happen. And so I think you can violate people's autonomy. I think most of you have made a rational choice, for example, to come here and get a degree, and I think you have autonomy and have made a good and rational decision, but studies also show that among your age group and among college students, that binge drinking is enormously prevalent. And why is that? Is the will overborne? Now, I'm going to tell you, it's less prevalent at schools like UCO because we're not making the list of the top 10 party schools in the country here. You know, hate to tell you that. If you came here for a party school, this probably isn't the place for you. But if you go, you know the #1 non-party school in the nation? They have a list. There's 2 lists. The top 10 and the top worst party schools in the nation. You know what always makes the top of the worst party schools in the nation? Brigham Young.
Is that it?
It's in Utah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a Mormon school, and so it's always listed as the at the bottom of the party school list. You're making a rational decision, and I think you're making an autonomous decision with regard to your educational future, but does that will become overborne by going to things like parties, raves? How many of you have gone to a rave? There's only one cool kid in the group. Is peer pressure enough to make you less autonomous than you are in other situations? I think it is. At least studies seem to suggest that, if you're making rational decisions, why would you ever binge drink?
You just get like in the moment and everyone else is drinking, I guess.
And there's pressure. And it's not just that there's peer pressure to drink, it's also not real fun to be around a lot of drunks if you're not drinking. It's not just the peer pressure, it's also, how many of you have been the DD? That's a horrible job. It's really a miserable job to be around people who are completely wasted when you're not. It's hard. Really, really hard. All right. Let me see. Make sure I got my camera on you. Okay.
Okay, I did mine over the U.S. government, versus Apple, on the whole, Apple, them trying to force Apple to make, that back door to break into the San Bernardino, terrorist phone. And basically, from Apple's stance, they don't want to, because not only, their big thing is, if they do it for this one time, because the government says, they're only going to use it this one time, but if they do it this one time, then, once it's made, and, they can make them use it multiple times, and if they let the U.S. government use it, then, what's keeping, the Chinese government from wanting to use it, and, see all of their phones. And their big thing is, too, if they're doing that, for example, in China, one of the main reasons, the people are buying the iPhones is for security purposes, they can't look at them, and they're more secure, and so that would, drop their prices, and, basically, the government even asking them to do this was a huge thing, because either they do it, and then it causes all this commotion, or they don't do it, and, some people are saying, they have to do it, because later on there could be more terrorists, and if they didn't do it, it would stop terrorism in the future. So saying, Apple would have blood on their hands if they don't fix this back door.
Okay, so there's, both sides in this debate are engaging in, when we talked about making rational arguments, there is one called an argument ad absurdum that's talked about in the book, which is really a form of deductive argument of the mode of taking instead of the mode of putting in multiple steps. But I told you that a lot of people make this argument poorly because they start engaging in just absolute leaps in logic. And so both sides of this debate are using what we might call the parade of horribles argument and appealing to emotion of the crowd, what the U.S. government wants. Now, the U.S. government actually starts talking to Apple, and they don't really want it to be hush hush. They don't, and what does Apple do? They're the ones that they run to the court of public opinion, don't they? And say, they're forcing us to do this. They're compelling us to do this. And if we do it, what you're going to see is there will be all kinds of bad results, because once we do it for the United States government, we have to do it for the Chinese government, and we have to do it for the Russian government, and we have to do it in those countries in the Middle East where people disappear. That's what it's called in totalitarian regimes, where people just disappear. There is no open and honest and fair trial system. You just go off. And whether you want to admit it or not, the Chinese government still engages in that. They have a huge number of people in concentration camp-like situations that are basically political prisoners. And so Apple's saying, look, if we do it for you, the United States government says, look, we're benign. Who is sovereign in the United States? We are. Sovereignty in the United States resides with the people. Aren't we great? But if you do it for the US in this one instance, you can't tell the Chinese no, and you can't tell the Russians no, and you can't tell the Iranians no. And we sell our products in all these places. And one of the things that happened in the so-called Arab Spring was technology, and particularly these devices, allowed people to organize and topple governments that had never been able to organize before, because your ability to get your message out to other people in a movement was so clandestine by virtue of the fact that you couldn't gather in large numbers. What does this device allow you to do? It allows you to communicate with, in ways that become very, very difficult for people to necessarily track. And so now you've got the United States government that wants you to do this, and if we do that, we're going to have to open it for everybody else. And what are they going to use this stuff for? Well, the governments in places like Syria and Libya will use it to track and force the company to open their product up so that they can go in and find political dissidents. And won't that just lead to horrible results overall? The United States government's parade of argument goes, look, we were attacked on 9/11. We know that there are terrorists out there. And every security analyst in this country says that it is not a matter of if we will be attacked in a terrorist attack again. It's a matter of what? When. And so if you don't unlock it in this instance, you're supporting the terrorist. Now this is an appeal to extreme emotion, right? You got Apple over here appealing to the emotion of the crowd of, ooh, scary, Big Brother, 1984, Orwell, watching you. And you got the US government over here saying, danger, 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 Will Robinson, let us in. Now, in order to unlock it, what is Apple going to have to do?
Well, they said, the new iPhones have this built-in thing to apparently where the top guys can't even look into anyone's phone, like it's totally private. And so they said it's like really ironic because the same people who made the technology to keep them from being able to look in have to like make a secret thing to be able to get into them. So, I mean, once the technology's made, like it can be used on any phone, but it'd be.
And the government actually screwed up in this case, didn't they? In the San Bernardino case? Because they had the phone, and they're the ones that screwed up on the encryption and locked it. They're the ones that locked the phone. And
erased everything off.
And now they want Apple to give them the back door. How do you do that?
Well, and Apple already let them apparently look into the iCloud thing or something, but they're fighting getting into the actual phone.
Okay, but what are you going to have to do to actually allow the government to get into the actual phone?
Put it on mobile devices.
What do you have to do to do that?
To create the new operating system.
You're going to have to create code to do it. What is code? It's an expression, right? There are various ways that you can go about coding. And isn't coding, and if you're a coder, if you are a computer science major and you're interested in coding, they'll argue that, now there's two kinds of ways about programming and writing programs. There's kind of a scientific way, and then there's cowboy programming. And cowboy programming is actually really creative. And a lot of big companies. I personally think Microsoft operates with a lot of cowboy programming because they have all these problems with their operating systems we'll pump it out there, we'll fix it on the back end of the process. It's expression. This is written expression, and it's protected by copyright. Aren't you compelling Apple to engage in expression by forcing them to write the code? And doesn't the United States Constitution in the Bill of Rights, Amendment 1, say, Congress shall make no law, right, abridging the freedom of speech? And by forcing, I mean, first of all, you're compelling them to be an agent of the government. Are you going to compensate them for it? And second of all, you're compelling them to engage in its most basic form, a form of communication and speech. And isn't that a priori wrong? To compel somebody to speak? Because you're right, I mean, this is a language, right? Isn't that compelled speech in violation of the First Amendment? Well, problem is the court's never held the First Amendment begins with the words, Congress shall make no law. Is no an absolute term, or is no an equivocal term? I'm asking, is no an absolute term?
I
Or
mean,
is
I would take
no-
it as absolute.
You don't take no as absolute?
No, I said I do.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you didn't.
No.
When your mother said no, you want to do something, right? When you're a teenager living at home, and you ask your parents, and your mother says no. Did that mean a little bit? Did that mean some? No, it meant no. And if you did it, what happened? There were consequences to that behavior. I think no is an absolute word. The Supreme Court has never said no is an absolute word. They've said no means maybe. Right? No means, I mean, I have no, this is judicial backflips to get to this point. And it starts with Oliver Wendell Holmes in a case called Schenck versus the United States. And here we start talking about Sparky and Schenck, right? And Holmes says you would never allow someone under a theory of free speech to do what? Go into a crowded theater and yell fire. Because it creates a what? Holmes actually abandons that position, by the way, later on. He starts to back away from that. But he says no one would seriously say that you could do that. And this is what we call the clear and present danger test of the First Amendment. We're not going to protect speech that presents a clear and present danger to the United States or others, individuals. So no doesn't mean no. It means maybe. It's an interesting result. All right, we'll finish these up on Tuesday. May have to slip over into Thursday. Good discussion. If you want to review or if you have questions, you want to email me or call me or text me, please do so. I need your Scantrons.
The essays are due in the 9 to 9 room.
Yeah.